is 6:15. Here we go. Hello. I would like to thank all of you for your concern. I have received so many emails and, people are wondering if I'm all right because I'm here in San Diego. Well, I would like to show my appreciation and thank you thank you for your concern, but I'm okay. I'm doing okay. So the picture there that I showed at the beginning of this vlog is a picture of my backyard, and you can see the sun and not many clouds, but there were fires on either side of where I live. I actually live right kind of in the middle, but I wasn't right where the fires were. They were kind of on either side of me. So I would like to discuss my experience with all of this. I had a previous vlog, and I now would like to put the video camera on myself and talk about this here experience. So I really enjoy being a volunteer with DCS. I do a lot of their videotaping and editing. And so they had asked me to come to Qualum Stadium, and for me, that was just a huge deal. And I knew it was going to be just a really amazing experience. So I went with 2 DCS staff members, and the 3 of us drove to the stadium. And when we got there, there was a ton of traffic from, people evacuating the fire areas. And people were very emotional. Some were just blank-faced. Some were showing a ton of emotion. And finally, we got into the parking lot, and that was not much better. There were just people driving erratically, left and right, all over the place. Nobody was following, the common rules of parking lot driving. So it was very stressful. We finally parked, and, we walked into the stadium. And so we were looking for a table, and there were just people. It was so crowded. There were people everywhere. There was food, drinks for people. So we continued to walk until we finally found the DCS table, and the people that were already there, they were really excited to see some fresh faces, some new people when we had arrived. And so we sat down and we were, discussing some things. There was an interpreter there who was explaining some things that had been going on for the past 2 days. And so at first I felt, to be honest here, I felt, that I don't really understand why there was an interpreter table set up. And so interpreter started explaining to me, and I began to realize how serious the situation was. And I have become so appreciative of the interpreters because of how they were able to help with getting information to deaf people and allowing for equal access to communication for deaf people in this situation where they had been evacuated to this stadium. All of the other information that was happening was coming over a PA. So for example, if, you needed to know where blankets were or where food was, or where you were supposed to sleep, or where the clinic was. All these different things were in different specific areas, and this information was coming over a PA, like a loudspeaker. And so deaf people, they can't hear that. They walk around with no idea as to, where things were. And if it came over the PA that your area the evacuation is done for your area and you are allowed to go home, deaf people would have no idea when they are able to go back to their home. So, many of the deaf people did stay near the interpreter table, and that way they were able to get lots of information as to what was going on. And the interpreter's work here is extremely important for deaf people. And I would, again, like to show my appreciation for the interpreters, and some of them were near Gate A. And, some of the deaf people that lived in evacuation areas that were stuck, maybe they had not seen the vlog, or maybe a friend had seen the vlog and had tried to pass this information on to them. You know, these things would be really helpful for the deaf community. So again, I would like to thank the interpreters because their responsibility was huge. You know, when they were at the stadium, they had to run. They would run from gate to gate to gate to gate. They would have to run to the clinic. You know, they had to run all these places to make sure, you know, that the information was frequently coming, that the information was getting to the deaf people. And say they saw someone signing or they saw someone with a hearing aid, they would go and, you know, let these people know where they were supposed to be, if they were supposed to be at gate A or if something had changed, you know, so that the information wasn't, you know, if something was getting backed up. And they just worked really hard to make sure that the information was getting to the deaf people. I also really would like to show my appreciation for one young man who carried a sign. He was not deaf, and he carried the sign all around, and it said Gate A on it, so that he could, you know, so that deaf people could see it and know they were to go to Gate A. So, you know, some deaf people were coming up to me, and some, you know, some weren't really very interested. But so there's, you know, another story that I would like to share from my past vlog. Now this is a sort of an awkward situation, and it is involving people's homes, and it was such a mess. Now when the fires happened, it was somewhat of what I would say is a reverse 911. So for example, normally you know, you call 911. If there's an emergency situation, you call 911. In this case, this was in a reverse 911 because the fires were happening and firemen and police officers were actually coming to people's homes and letting them know that there was an emergency. Also, they were using helicopters. Now, all these things were based on, all this information was getting to people orally. And so deaf people couldn't hear this. So what would happen is cops would go up to their doors and knock on their doors and tell them they needed to evacuate. And they would be writing back and forth, and there would be all this confusion. And sometimes the cops would think that the deaf people were trying to protest, which they weren't. They just couldn't hear the emergency information getting to them. And some of these deaf people just barely got out, and there was a lot of emotion involved. And so now DCS is going to work really hard to develop a better system, a group system, and set something up, set something up so that there's equal access to communication, so that, you know, deaf people, there's other ways to get a hold of deaf people when there's an emergency going on in their in the area in which they live, instead of just going and banging on their doors. And I would like to report that during this fire, there have been no reported deaths or injuries for deaf people, which, you know, makes me feel really good. I'm glad that didn't happen. Now DCS is really trying very hard to break through, and they're working with OCE, the Office of Emergency Systems, OES, Office of Emergency Services, to try and set up a better method for deaf people, because, you know, not all deaf people are great with English, and sometimes closed captioning isn't the best option. So really the best option is to always bring an interpreter in and make sure that an interpreter can show up. And, you know, this has made me extremely motivated, and I would really like to see some kind of early intervention things set up so that, you know, in emergency situations it won't be such a mess and so chaotic, and deaf people will be able to have that equal access to communication. And I found that it's very important to make sure that, you know, we're educating, and with education, you know, we'll be able to get that equal access to communication in an emergency situation. So we're really trying to progress and break through with this.